Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, taking a look at the future of food and drink distribution in the UK. I'm Callum Johnston and work in the food and drink team here at SAC Consulting, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues Kerry Ritchie and Paul Mayfield to explore how new technologies are rapidly evolving and transforming distribution in the UK food and drink sector. Before we get started, I'm going to hand over to Kerry to give some background to this session. Over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Callum, and hi everyone. It's great to be involved in this webinar today. Having worked in the food and drink sector for over 35 years, it's amazing when you stop and think about all the changes that have occurred along the way. And thinking about more recent times, the food and drink industry has had to flex due to the recent pandemic, and it's facing a number of other challenges and changes, not least Brexit. So here at SAC Consulting, we thought it was a good time to take a look at some of the changes that are happening in food and drink distribution. And Paul has kindly pulled together a presentation for us today, and I'm now going to hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Kerry and Callum, for that pleasant introduction. I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. I was brought up on a small family farm in South Cambridgeshire and then worked on the farm with the family for 10 years after leaving agricultural college. We stopped farming when my father retired, and after a short period working for a firm of quantity surveyors, I then joined Stanhay Webb that used to make precision drills for sugar beet, vegetables, etc. I was the UK sales manager, working with dealers and farmers across the whole country, and it introduced me actually to the fresh produce sector, and I began to get an understanding of how that sector worked, selling, how that sector worked in moving perishable goods from the field into the retailers in sort of very short time. After a period of time as marketing manager at NIAB, I then joined the Food Chain Centre, which, for those of you with a longish memory, may recall came out of the Curry Commission report in the early 2000s. This was based at the Institute of Grocery Distribution down near Watford, which is a research and training charity, which many of the major retailers and food manufacturers were actually members. And that gave me a real insight into the supply chains of the retailers and the distribution of grocery goods around the country. After that, I joined SAC Consulting in 2007, and I worked in the food and drink team along with other colleagues, including Callum and Kerry. Since then, with businesses throughout Scotland and other parts of the UK. So as you can see, I've got varied experience of the sort of agri-food sector, and more recently I've become interested in digital technologies as well, and what influences these will have on farms and the supply chain. So as Kerry said, this is a really good time actually to look at how I think, taken on the research and readings that I've had from various articles, the supply chains are going to change over the next few years in response to what's happened during COVID. But as Kerry also mentioned, Brexit and what's going to happen there. So as you can see from my next slide, we're looking at what was happening pre the pandemic. In general, the UK agricultural supply chains were some of the most sophisticated and efficient in the world. And to be honest, that hasn't changed very much during the pandemic. They've perhaps become a bit stretched, but they've still managed to function pretty well. And the rest of the world still often looks at how we operate our supply chains when they're looking at their own. There's an increasing trend towards multi-channel growth by the retailers. So, over the years, we've seen them go from small, relatively in the centre of city stores to edge of town stores to out of town stores, and sort of major giant warehouse type shops, which you have to drive to. And then more recently, we've seen the growth of online retailing, and actually a move back towards the centre of cities and towns again with their convenience stores. So there's a number of different fields that the retailers are working in different size outlets, and increasingly different means, different channels to get to their consumers. The larger retailers tend to work using regional distribution centres that serves a large geographical area. So this idea of a hub from which they spoke out into their different shops within a region, and they usually use just-in-time replenishment. So the manufacturers and producers have to kind of book a slot or have a slot to deliver into the stores, and it's a sort of well-oiled machine that keeps all their stores going. At a more smaller level, we've got the wholesale distributors that tend to work with the smaller producers, although they also work with some of the larger ones as well, and service the sort of the tier down, so more of the local stores, the farm shops, the independent retailers, and the like. So there are a number of options for sort of getting your groceries around the country. Many of the larger retailers were progressing automation projects to increase efficiency and reduce costs before the pandemic struck, but many of these have actually been put on hold during the pandemic. So last summer, pre-pandemic, Tesco's announced plans to establish 25 highly automated urban fulfillment centres, which are like micro fulfillment centres, which would basically be bolted onto the back of their stores. And they were hoping to have these built by 2022, with 3 of them actually coming online by the middle of this year. This was an attempt to preempt the increase in online shopping, which they were kind of anticipating, which I'll talk about a bit later in another slide. They also plan to further develop a cashless store idea, concept, but both the projects are currently on hold, as are a number of similar developments with other retailers. So the retailers are still operating in the way that they did. They've been under strain with the pandemic, but they've managed to successfully maintain their stores and keep them running. But their development projects have been on hold up to date. Moving on to the next slide, we can see that, as I said, the supply chains of the major retailers have coped in general. They've been quite resilient. Apart from a few days at the start of the first lockdown period, when certain products, such as pasta and toilet rolls, were temporarily out of stock through panic buying, the retailers have been able to keep shelves stocked, despite some strain in certain supply chains and certain products, which sometimes led to the occasional temporary out of stock. But in general, they've coped really well. We've seen, and all retailers have experienced a large increase in online shopping. Consumers have generally been much more safety conscious since the start of the pandemic, and have become quite wary of going into store. And this has led to online shopping across all the retail, and not just grocery. We've seen it with clothes and other things as well. Previously, online growth was increasing in a predictable manner, but the pandemic has seen this sudden surge of online orders, which as I mentioned earlier, Tesco's were anticipating, but obviously this has increased in pace hugely, and because they've not been able to build, not just Tesco's but all the others, not being able to build the stores that they hope they would, the fulfillment element of it, they got slightly caught out. So they've actually recently doubled their online capacity to 1.2 million orders a week. That equates to about 2 orders every second, which is an enormous amount, and shows actually how flexible they have been in being able to do that. But around 90% of these orders are actually picked from the store. So they don't have their own dedicated supply chains as yet, which the sort of developments they were planning were going to be. This actually isn't hugely efficient, but it's a way that shows the way that they've flexed within their operation to be able to fulfill this demand. They've also had to hire, to cope with this, about 12,000 new pickers and 500 new drivers to cope with this growth. And it's much the same story for many of the other retailers with online offerings. Of course, not all the retailers do have online offerings, but many of them do now.
Paul, if I could just ask a quick question at this point,
Yep.
That would be fantastic.
Yep.
You indicated, obviously, more people are buying now online, and we've talked there about how the larger, major, multiple retailers have coped with that. How do you think this is going to affect the smaller producers?
Well, we've actually seen, and I will come on to this in a later slide. I was going to mention it, that actually a number of the both producers and smaller retailers, particularly some of the farm shops, have actually gone to online retailing as well, as part of their strategy of reacting to what's happening and people not being able to visit their store, etc. They've often organised their own delivery, or the other thing that has grown, particularly with local stores, is click and collect, which is actually a lot more convenient for people with local stores, perhaps, than some of the major retailers, where they may be several miles away from, say, 10 miles or a bit more. So click and collect is a little bit more of a hassle. Whereas if it's the shop just down the road, then that's much more convenient. So that's kind of one of the elements. Also, we've seen a number of producers who perhaps would normally sell through wholesalers or direct to their small local retailers, are actually have a shop online as well themselves, and they've started selling direct to the customer. That doesn't always work with every product, but certainly some people or businesses have gone that way.
Thanks, Paul. That's really great. Thank you.
Just sort of a word of caution. There's a sort of perhaps slightly counterintuitive. Ocado, which is the largest dedicated online grocery business in the UK, mostly working down south and perhaps in the northwest a bit as well. Not so much in Scotland, or not at all in Scotland at the moment. But they have completely automated fulfillment process for their online orders. So I will show a picture a bit later on of their robots in their store that put orders together to be taken out on their delivery vans. Strangely, although automation is coming and all the retailers are looking at automation type projects, it does have its limitations, in as much as once you reach capacity within the fulfillment center, then you've got nowhere to expand. It's very difficult to expand a fulfillment center really quickly, and particularly if it's got robots, etc. in it. So you might be able to work a bit harder, get a few more orders out, but there is a finite limit, and actually they have they have found this in one or two of their fulfillment centres as people contacted them during the pandemic to become new customers, new online orders. They've actually had to restrict the number of new people that they can serve because they just weren't able to service them due to the limits within their distribution centres. So that's a kind of converse of what's been happening elsewhere, and something to bear in mind perhaps for the future of others, that there isn't a simple answer to all this. So what really this demonstrates is that flexibility has been the key to how distributors and retailers have coped over the last few months. And some of the most adaptable have actually been smaller businesses, as I alluded to when I answered Kerry's question. Click and collect, home delivery by small farm retailers, farm shops or small retailers has certainly taken off. There's probably a question about whether actually home delivery and even the really large guys find it difficult to make a real profit, a meaningful profit from home delivery services. But it's what the consumer wants now, so they're having to deal with that. And I think in the future we'll see them looking for ways to cut costs as much as possible to try and make the online ordering and online delivery cost effective. So as I said, a lot of the technology and improvements in supply chains have actually gone onto the back burner during COVID. But that doesn't mean to say that it's gone away. Many of the retailers have actually increased their planning for post-COVID in terms of distribution, or in some cases probably altered their planning as well, because COVID has thrown up a number of issues that perhaps weren't even envisaged initially. So we will see quite a change, I think, and quite rapidly once things begin to return to some sort of normality. What they have done recently is heavily invested in labour. As I said, that not just Tesco's but a number of others have taken thousands on to cope with the extra demand, both in store but particularly online, and the increase in grocery, the grocery business. This is actually hitting their costs as well. So although business has increased one way or another, and possibly spending has increased, so have their costs. So that's something to kind of be aware of as we go forward. Post-COVID, online shopping is expected to continue growth. It'll probably settle down from where it was, but it'll continue on its growth curve. And as the photograph demonstrates on the slide, I mean, it can be done from a number of different devices now. So laptops, mobile, and the like, tablets and the like. So and what we're also seeing is competition, I guess, the third point there, in the speed of delivery. So a number of the retailers in the cities are kind of offering 1 or 2 hour delivery times. So order it now and it'll be at your door within the next 2 hours or next 1 hour. Obviously that can't be done all over the country, but in urban areas it certainly can be. We will see a return to automation, and that will be for two reasons. One, to try and increase efficiency, and the other will be to try and remove labour, actually manual labour, because it's relatively expensive when compared to automation. Although the initial capital cost, the sort of write down over a period is much cheaper than having lots of people. So if that's the direction of travel, different skills are going to be needed. The human element won't be taken out completely, but they'll be looking for things like engineers to service robots and other parts of the distribution technology. There'll be coding and sort of all those sort of things are going to be in quite high demand by the retailers and distributors as well. And the final point there is this, we saw it before COVID, and I think this will continue and maybe again pick up pace, will be everything around sustainability. And on my next slide, you can see that, and you know, nearly all the retailers have a plan for trying to achieve net zero as much as possible, and they're pushing that requirement down to their suppliers as well. So they're looking for supply chains to be net zero, not just their own business, but they're looking for suppliers and all the way back to farmers to be as best as they possibly can net zero. So that's taking carbon, basically taking carbon out of the supply of goods as much as is feasible. Something else that a number of the retailers are looking at, and the distributors, the logistics firms, are electric vehicles, particularly the lorries, and also other means of moving goods around. So we have seen a return to the trains, and that's possibly going to continue, but it won't be the total answer. But you know, it's something that may well increase in the future. Electric vehicles, and particularly lorries, which will be are quite, you know, even and in their electric form are quite energy hungry, do throw up other infrastructure issues as for example, you know, can the grid support plugging in of loads of lorries to charge up at particular times of day and the like? You know, we had an incident not that long ago when two power stations went down in the winter and caused issues in certain parts of the country a couple of years ago. So actually plugging lots of lorries and electric vehicles in, or turning all vehicles to electric does require infrastructure that's not directly involved in the supply chain, but it needs it to be there to make it work. Other demands, I think, which we saw pre-COVID, and will be ethical production. So things about you know, animal welfare, and all those type of things, and certainly perhaps in other countries more than the UK, but stuff like palm oil, the picture on at the bottom there, production that's receiving quite a lot of negative press at the moment, and you know, there's stuff around fish and all those sort of areas. So it's something that the consumer and from them the retailers are demanding of their supply chains, as well as their distribution operators. And lastly, connected, I guess, to net zero, but sustainable production. But it's not just about carbon. There's also things around the likes of soil quality, water usage, and those type of things as well, and trying to make them as sustainable as possible. And that will be, I'm sure, pushed down the supply chain as much as possible by the retailers and the consumers. So there's certainly things that have already started pre-COVID, but I think will continue and continue to increase. Some of the posts I've talked about, the increase in technology and some of the things that we might see. The picture on the top left hand side there is one of a micro fulfillment center, and as I said earlier, these can be bolted pretty much onto the back of a store. The idea of these is that they will act a little bit like a mini distribution hub, in as much as but they will be not just about fulfilling or the requirements of the store themselves, but also used for online orders, so that they're not having to pick off the shelf. They can fulfill orders, you know, here as well. It means that by attaching them to the store, that the distribution lorries or logistical transport, etc., only have to deliver to one place rather than to a store and then to a separate online fulfillment center. So that as I said, Tesco's had a number, and some of the other retailers as well had a number of these planned. And I guess when things return to normal, we'll see these come along quite rapidly. And these will be very automated, so they'll have a number of robotics for picking and that type of thing, as well as a lot of digital technology in there. Secondly, again, will be the increase in robotics. The picture on the top right is actually the Ocado fulfillment center. As you can see, all the robots are running over the top of the bins, dropping stuff off or picking it up, whichever way around they're doing it. And we'll see more of these, I think, with the major retailers as well. Bottom left is actually a cashless store. It's a concept one, that one, but the bit you see you walk into identifies you as you walk in. You would have an account with that store. You would presumably scan, although there may be automated scanning as you pick stuff off the shelf, and as you leave, your money would be taken. The total of your shopping will be taken as you leave out through the scanners, and that's something that it's one of the sort of priorities is to get rid of the cashiers, because again, it's labour. It's a bottleneck often within the stores as well, which the customers don't like. So doing this is kind of one of the top priorities for a number of the retailers. And on the right hand side is an electric lorry, basically. And as I said previously, there will be a number. The retailers and the distributors and those within the supply chain will be converting lorries to electric, particularly this sort of size where they're delivering locally, I think, in the first instance. The smaller ones, the larger ones will probably be a little longer in coming. Having said that, I did read where one of them, I think it was Sainsbury's, planned to convert their fleet of 5,000 lorries fairly quickly, or as quickly as they possibly can. So that's going to happen as quickly as quite quickly post-pandemic. Again, it'll be an infrastructure thing.
Wow, Paul, this is amazing. I think Callum, I think we've been chatting there. I think you've got a question there about automation.
Yes, thanks very much, Kerry. Paul, you said that automation is very likely to increase post-pandemic. But what will this mean for smaller suppliers and manufacturers?
I think in general, it's unlikely that some of the smaller, it depends what you mean by small, but we'll take it the sort of SME size and possibly down to micro size at the moment. They won't be, I can't see them automating. I mean, the capital cost of putting in a robotics or an automatic picking system, etc., is kind of out of the realms of a good number of small businesses. The slide I'm coming on to, they may start to get involved with, and I'll explain that later. But it's perhaps the big tech stuff. As I say, I'm not sure that they will necessarily get involved with. There might be some around traceabilities, like having QR codes on products and that sort of thing, so that the product can be traced through the supply chain. That may become increasingly a demand, and that's connected to the next bit that I'm talking about. I think the thing that will probably affect them the soonest is going to be stuff around the sustainability side. So, helping to achieve net zero and those sort of things, because regardless of whether you're a major retailer or the small ones, I think that that's something that's gaining momentum with consumers and even government now potentially. So, it's not just going to be the big boys that are going to need to do this, so are the smaller businesses as well. So initially, probably not so much with the tech, but certainly around sustainability for small producers.
I've just, you've stimulated a thought, and I thought I'd just maybe raise it. I don't think we can answer it today. You could imagine, couldn't you, some of this technology being brought together almost maybe on a regional basis for some of the small businesses around a hub. I'm thinking here in terms of Q codes, in terms of telling the story, bringing in the traceability piece, and then actually maybe you could potentially see fulfillment at a regional level for the local producers. I don't think we've got an answer for that now. I just thought that's something to maybe think about. What do you guys think?
I think so. I think you're right. I think that the danger is if the smaller businesses don't get involved in some of this stuff, they're going to get left behind. So there probably does need to be a way of doing being able to get involved in this. It's a little more difficult with the big hardware, the robots and the automated distribution and those type of things. The digital side that I'm going to talk to in a minute, that might be possible to do as a shared system in the future. But I would agree, Kerry. I mean, even I read somewhere where even the big retailers are looking now at, and I did allude to this, they're looking at different business models, different ways of working as a result of the pandemic and potentially of Brexit as well. So I think that smaller businesses are going to have to do the same thing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I guess when we're going to look at the next bit, that is mind-boggling. So let's have a look at the next bit of the presentation. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So there's also the stuff that you don't see. So the bits I've talked about generally is the stuff that you can see, although sustainability is perhaps about stuff that you don't see, but I think we're all used to that. But there's a number of digital technologies coming along that are going to make, I think, quite dramatic changes to the way in which not just the grocery sector, but all businesses is going to operate in the future. So we'll start at the top left, and I think most of us have heard of artificial intelligence, not always in a good way, but used properly and ethically, it has huge potential in terms of demand management, forecasting, all that type of thing, being able to automate ordering, that sort of stuff. That's being worked on at the moment. There's some artificial intelligence has been implemented, but it's at a very low level at the moment. So it has a huge potential. And again, with online ordering, all of that could be automated through using artificial intelligence. So that's an area certainly to look out for. Top right is blockchain. I'm not going to say too much about this because I'm going to do a presentation sort of in a bit more detail around this at a later date, hopefully. But it's a way. This is a way of, I suppose, what blockchain is good for is providing traceability, provenance, and a certain amount of food safety, in as much as it allows you very quickly to trace a product back down the supply chain. That obviously requires all the parts of the supply chain to be involved in the blockchain, but it's a means of keeping a record on a ledger that everybody can share, not necessarily see everything, but everybody shares, and it's updated across the whole ledger with everybody, every participant, that allows a product to be traced along the whole supply chain. So that's something that I think has a place. It's not a complete answer, but it certainly has a place within grocery over the next few years. The middle one is Internet of Things. So this really is all the other bits and pieces. So this is things like sensors and EDI for tracing, RFID, all those kind of things. So anything, it's about refrigerators being connected to the internet, say at home even, so that it automatically restock, that type of thing. There's a huge area that this can be used for, and that fits in with the other two that I've described as well. So you'll see a growth in that. I mean, we're already seeing it where refrigerators are sold with sort of this type of technology attached to it. It's just that it often at the moment it doesn't lead anywhere too much, but it will do in the future. The one at the bottom left, which is more difficult to understand, but that's what I'm talking about there, is digital twinning. This is where you actually create an online version of a physical entity. So it might be a distribution store, it might be a retail outlet, it might be a lorry, for example, and you take a pretty much a digital copy of everything and how it operates, and it gives the opportunity to run what if scenarios. So if there's a problem, or if you want to try and reduce, I don't know, energy usage or whatever, you can run that through the digital side of that entity to see what answers it produces. So you don't actually perhaps have to physically change the store or the distribution center to find out what effect that has on efficiency or energy use or those type of things. So again, it's not just used here, it's often used in the sort of energy sector and those sort of areas at the moment, but I think there's little doubt it will come into grocery and even potentially onto the farm sector and the smaller businesses as well in the future. And lastly, one that's sometimes talked about is kind of the virtual reality thing. So this is putting on a headset and being able to see yourself in a different place. And this actually could work quite well with, say, online ordering. I mean, some people still like to go around a shop because you can go around and see things and compare against one another. Using a VR set, you could actually do that from your home. You wouldn't have to travel to the shop. And you know, linking it with blockchain, you could potentially see the journey of the product through its whole cycle right back to the farm. There's quite a lot that could actually be done with VR. It's at very early stages yet, but again, there seems to be talk that it's one of the technologies that will come into the distribution sector. So yeah, as I say, these are the digital ones. They're not standalone. They're probably a number of these, if not all of them, will be working hand in hand. They'll be integrated, and they'll be integrated with the hardware side of things as well. So they're kind of, don't think of all these things as separate entities. They're going to be part of the everyday business. I think, given time, it'll take a wee bit of time to implement. And finally, just to mention a couple of other technologies, mainly because they kind of have hit the headlines at various points, and they're being talked about because of that. The one on the left-hand side is actually a pilot that's happening in Milton Keynes, or has been happening in Milton Keynes. This is a little sort of automated vehicle, if you will, that has been delivering groceries in Milton Keynes. So it runs around the streets or the pavements, delivering to local houses from the retailers. It's been a nice experiment. From a personal point of view, I struggle to see whether these are going to be a serious contender in the future, mainly because if you think about in a reasonable sized town or a city, the major retailers each having their own delivery vehicle running around streets and side streets and whatever, and getting in traffic's way and people's way and everything else, and probably breaking down at times. Whether that's going to be a practical proposition, I'm not sure. I'm sure they'll have a place, but I don't think personally that they're going to, in their current form, are going to sort of take over home delivery. And a little bit the same can be said for drones as well. I mean, at the moment, our legislation doesn't allow for drones to deliver on a large scale, but if it does in the future, then I still can't see it, because are you going to want these things flying about everywhere, lots of them in the sky, dropping into your back garden? I don't, as I say, I don't see it as a major form of home delivery. Where it actually could be quite useful is to delivering to isolated customers or consumers. In rural areas where they're a long way, say a farm, down a long farm track, and etc. For the likes of Tesco's or Sainsbury's to deliver an online order with a van is quite expensive, whereas actually sending a drone there by agreement and it landing and delivering is probably going to be cheaper and much more effective than sending a van out. So there may be, I think, uses for drones in certain cases, but I can't quite see them taking over from the delivery van at the moment. Who knows in the future? Sorry,
Paul. It's just again, it's getting your head around these things, and it's quite hard to understand how a drone would deliver what you might get normally in a van. You can imagine for small quantities and that sort of thing. Can I just ask a quick question?
Yep.
You've shown that the future of distribution is highly dominated by automation and technology. Just to sort of play devil's advocate, do you think that's necessarily a good thing?
Not necessarily, I think. It's not just going to have change with business, but it'll have a social change as well. As I said, a lot of the technology, certainly probably post COVID, is going to be based around reducing staff numbers, and that there's got to have been a big trumpeting in the papers of like I said, Tesco's taking on huge numbers, Sainsbury's taking on huge numbers, etc. What they're ultimately going to be looking to do is get rid of those people again. But okay, there will be a change of jobs, but those kind of low skilled manual jobs are going to go, and where are those people going to find those jobs? So there is a whole social aspect to automation, not just in the grocery sector, but in all these other sectors, because it tends to be the low skilled manual jobs that are ones that are most easily automated, or the first to be automated anyway. So there are issues around that. Of course, if you've got mechanical things, they also break down. So you're having to build in a certain amount of flexibility as well, which may lead to inefficiencies within themselves. We'll have, time will tell, and we'll have to see. And as I said before, it's not just about infrastructure within the food and drink sector. It's the wider infrastructure of provision of electricity, because most of these things, all the digital and most of the other things I've described, are driven by electricity. So we certainly need a lot more power in that respect, and that's not something that the individual businesses, even the large retailers, have a big say over. That's something to do with the government and the power suppliers. So no, it's not all good. It's interesting, but I'm not necessarily sure it's all good. I mean, potentially we'll end up going to a shop and there won't be a person there, which isn't always a good thing either. Who do I ask when I can't find something, or need some help, or whatever it might be?
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it brings a whole new meaning or a whole new demand on how you tell the story of the product. I'm just thinking all the work we've done in terms of storytelling and those sorts of things. And then we mentioned, if there's nobody there to talk to about
Yes.
the product, then it kind of there's a whole pressure on that sort of the technology around telling the story. So it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, blockchain could actually help with that, but that still requires the consumer to be proactive in asking, well, what's the provenance of this product,
Yeah.
and then going onto a website or clicking an app or something. Whereas if, as you say, if somebody's there in store and gets talking, you can actually tell them about it. They're having to be less proactive and more passive, which is probably more of a positive thing than then having to do the work.
Can I jump in with a very quick question too, Paul, before you finish up? You mentioned there that that drones have got the brilliant possibility of sort of giving rural communities, quick transport of goods, not only in food and drink, but also it can be in medical sort of sector as well. And you mentioned the benefits of the technology for farmers, and I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit about the opportunities and perhaps limitations of new technologies for farmers.
Well, I suppose the one you probably think of is well, the one you said actually, the drones, not necessarily for delivering things, although potentially yes they could do that, but more in use. There's talk of using them more on farm, both for sort of precision farming, so being able to spray hotspots, identifying that initially through the use of cameras and photography, to perhaps detect disease or pests or whatever, and then using a drone itself to treat a specific area of the field where that disease has come in, or the pests are prevalent, or the like. So yeah, I think we might see that over the next few years. I think in terms of, I mean, at the moment, drones have to be operated within the line of sight. So that there is potential to program a drone to fly off miles and miles and deliver something, and it's been proven that can, that is quite feasible. But we're not currently by law allowed to do that. So things have got to change to really get the benefit from that type of a use of drones. Of course, they did reach, I suppose, become popular, not so much popular. There was news during the pandemic of them using a drone to deliver medical equipment and PPE to the Isle of Wight, I think it was. So they were flying them off the south coast over the Solent to the Isle of Wight. I think because, again, that was line of sight, you could still see it. So, they have been used for that purpose. But from farmers' point of view, I think, it's going to be more about the farming aspect. There are some of the digital stuff that the farmers, we've been working on blockchain, for example, use on farm, and I think IoT, and well, certainly some farms are beginning to use IoT devices, EDI in animals' ears and the like, so that you can track them, and artificial intelligence is just beginning to creep into there. And I think that farmers are going to have to start looking at these things, because again, it'll be the supply chain that's going to requirement to get involved in some of this stuff. Whether individual farmers need to become programmers and whether they need to buy their own packages of these things, I'm not sure. I think it's, again, as Kerry mentioned earlier, with this distribution, is probably going to be more about syndicating, getting together a group of farmers who use a single package, or who subcontract the use of AI or whatever it is, and buying those services in, rather than having to do it all themselves. I don't think that in many cases that's going to be practical, but certainly it's going to come along. I think the digital side to the farm, over the coming years.
I've got a couple of questions. Sorry, Callum, is that okay? I've got a couple of questions, Paul. Coming back to local food and drink and local products and local retailers, we've seen that growth, as you said, in terms of the local farm shops, the local independents during the pandemic. we know some of that will remain after things go back to what is the new normal. What I'd like to explore a bit more about the sort of impact of that on distribution and the opportunity for others to become involved in distribution and in the distribution of local food, and also the potential for existing players in the industry, in the distribution industry, to maybe collaborate a little bit more with these sorts of businesses. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it certainly presents an opportunity for the local wholesale, the local food wholesalers that we see around Scotland and other parts of the UK, to become, much more proactive in this area. I think that, as you rightly said, there's a question with the farm shops and the local independents as to whether they'll be able to retain the new customers that they've been able to gain during the pandemic as people buy locally. But there are, again, they're going to have to change their business models. They don't want to be trying to mimic what the major retailers are doing. They want to offer something different, and I think that again gives the wholesalers who many of those businesses do buy from, or even the local producers who perhaps serve direct, an opportunity to do something different as well in terms of the sort of type of product, the range of products, and sort of serving a slightly different market segment. So rather than just selling what you can find in a local, the local Tesco's, the local Waitrose or whatever, you're finding a specific local range within these places, and either distributed through the local wholesaler, or the national wholesaler, whoever they use, or directly from the producer themselves. So I think this is going to potentially have a profound effect on the whole sector in the way in which it operates, both within the products that they carry, how they present them, the channels that they use, and the different technologies that they use. What's your thought on that, Kerry?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I'm just sitting there thinking, yeah, I mean, there's potentially some good opportunities here for wholesalers to carry new ranges that satisfy a sort of new local demand, but also in terms of those that maybe haven't worked together before to work together and collaborate more. So yeah, I don't think I've got a bespoke answer, or but I think it's definitely something to explore and to think about a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Callum. I've got one other question, though, if you haven't, but do you want to comment on that? No, Callum?
No, I'm happy. Kerry, have you got one final question before we finish up?
Yeah, it just struck me in the when you were talking about sustainability, Paul, and you're talking about the move to electric vehicles, and it got me thinking about, how we're seeing the growth in the growth in the interest of reducing carbon, and linked to, I guess, the using sustainability, linked to ethics, linked to environmental credentials of products. There's a big opportunity here, and it's not gone away. It's been maybe paused a little bit during the pandemic. But I was thinking there's an opportunity here for maybe to raise awareness of our carbon calculator, AgriCalc, in terms of raising, letting people know about it, and to get people to start thinking beyond the farm of how AgriCalc can help. I mean, we know our colleagues are working obviously with farmers, but also more increasingly now with some of the retailers and the producers in the supply chain. So I wonder if it's an opportunity to say, look, if anyone that's listening to this is interested in that they get in touch, and we can introduce them to the correct colleagues, and they can take a look at that carbon calculator. What
Yeah, Definitely. Well, I've kind of got a connection into to the team that are working with AgriCalc. So my contact details are on the final slide. So please, anybody who has any questions either about what I've talked about or, about the sustainability side and all those sort of areas and anything else to do with the food and drink supply chain, contact me. And if I can't answer it, I'll put you in touch with somebody that can, hopefully.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I just finish up by expressing my thanks to both of you, but particularly Paul. That's been a fantastic whistle-stop tour of some amazing technologies in the food and drink sector. As Paul says, please get in touch. SRUC are working on a number of projects in this area. AgriCalc is one example. But there are many more, and looking at how new technologies can be used within not only at the farm gate, but right throughout the supply chain too. So please get in touch through Paul or through the team at SAC Consulting, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, everyone.